All right, welcome. Today we're diving into something pretty powerful, a kind of unseen force that's quietly shaping our economic world, political risk. We're going to explore how the personalities of leaders and, yeah, even the mood of the public can make economies either soar or totally crash. And by the end, you'll have the tools to start seeing these forces at play for yourself. So let's just jump right in with a big question, one you've probably thought about. Why do so many economic forecasts get it, well, just plain wrong? We've all seen it, right? These super confident predictions that end up being completely off the mark. So what's going on? Is it just bad math, or is there something really crucial missing from their models? And the answer is a huge, resounding yes. It turns out that just looking at the pure numbers, things like currency flows and inflation rates, that only gives you half the picture. Any economic model is, well, it's just incomplete if it ignores the human element. The messy, unpredictable world of politics and all that social pressure. Okay, so let's get a clear definition on the table so we're all on the same page. When we're talking about political and social risk, what do we mean? Well, we're talking about the very real danger that decisions made by governments or maybe actions taken by social groups can actually hurt the profitability of a business or an investment. It's really where power, people, and profits all collide. Now, what's really interesting here is that this isn't just about, tracking who's up and who's down in the polls. It's way more subjective than that. It means you have to really understand the personalities of political leaders, their specific management styles, and, this is crucial, that simmering discontent you sometimes see among large groups of people who feel left behind. These are the kinds of human factors that raw data alone just can't capture. So you might be wondering, okay, how can we possibly get a handle on something that's so complex? Well, the key is to break it down. We can actually organize all these different risks into a really clear three-layer framework. So here are the three levels of risk. You can kind of think of it like this. At the very top, you've got the immediate day-to-day crises. Then, in the middle, you have these slower, more fundamental shifts in a country's long-term direction. And at the base, you have the massive global changes that end up impacting pretty much everyone. So let's break down each one of these levels. All right, first up is level 1, crisis management. This is the stuff you see making headlines all the time, the sudden shocks and how leaders react to them right then and there. So here, we're talking about things like a government suddenly running out of money, or a huge drop in oil prices, or maybe an unexpected social protest that pops up out of nowhere. But what's really key at this level isn't just the event itself. It's the leadership style in response to it, right? Does a leader try to negotiate, or do they crack down? Their choices can either escalate or defuse a situation in a heartbeat. Okay, now let's go one layer deeper to level 2, strategic shifts. This is where we start to see those slower, deeper changes, the ones with much, much longer lasting consequences. Yeah, this is where the entire game can change. I mean, think about a new government that comes in with a totally different agenda, or those slow-burning social movements that finally just erupt and completely shift the balance of power. This can lead to fundamental changes in things we take for granted, like property rights, business contracts, or price controls. And those are risks that are a lot harder to protect yourself from. And finally, that brings us to level 3, global geopolitical shifts. This is the broadest layer of all, where the actions of major world powers create these huge ripple effects that can be felt thousands of miles away. For example, think about this. When the U.S. Federal Reserve raises interest rates to control its own inflation, it sends shockwaves through financial markets everywhere. Or when China suddenly changes its demand for something like copper or oil, that affects economies all the way from Latin America to Africa. These are decisions made for domestic reasons, but they have absolutely massive international consequences. Okay, let's make this even more concrete. A perfect classic example of political risk in action is a pattern you see playing out in democracies all over the world, what we call the electoral boom and bust cycle. The theory here is actually pretty simple, because let's face it, voters care a lot about their jobs and how much money is in their pocket. Politicians have this huge incentive to juice the economy right before an election. They'll often pull some short-term levers, like cranking up government spending or making credit really easy to get, all to create this temporary feeling of prosperity and hopefully win some votes. And this isn't just a textbook theory. We've seen it happen in the real world. Take Mexico, for example. Right before its 1994 election, the government put off some painful but really necessary economic reforms just to help the ruling party. And what happened? Well, it led directly to a sudden currency collapse known as the tequila crisis right after the election.
Or look at Spain before its 2008 election. They pretty much just ignored a massive housing bubble, which made the financial crash that followed way, way worse.
So here's the crucial point. It often doesn't even matter who wins the election. The pattern is just remarkably consistent. You get this artificial, politically motivated boom before the vote, which then means you need a painful, corrective bust after the vote to get deficits and inflation back under control. It's a really predictable cycle of political behavior that has very, very real economic consequences.
Okay, so if these risks are basically everywhere, how do we even begin to analyze them? Well, the key is to stop looking at a country as just one single thing and start mapping out the specific people and the groups who actually hold the power.
And there's actually a pretty systematic way to do this. First step, you identify all the key actors. And I mean everyone, not just the ruling party, but the opposition, powerful unions, major business groups. Step 2, you analyze their goals and their values. What do they care about more, economic stability or social spending? Are they friendly to the private sector? And then finally, step 3, you ask the really critical questions. How will they manage a crisis? What institutional changes might they try to make when things get tough?
But it's not just about the players on the field. It's also about the rules of the game they all have to play by. And that's where a country's institutions are so important. There's this quote that just sums it up perfectly. In a country with strong institutions, the personalities of the leaders are not so decisive. Think about that. When a country has these strong, independent institutions, the whims and personalities of individual leaders just matter a whole lot less. Even a really controversial leader is sort of hemmed in by the system.
So what do these guardrails actually look like in the real world? Well, they're things like fiscal responsibility laws that keep a lid on debt. They're independent central banks that can control inflation without getting a call from a politician. They're flexible exchange markets that can absorb shocks. And there is a strong Supreme Court that can actually veto unconstitutional changes. These are the institutions that act as guardrails, creating the predictability and stability that is so, so important. Ultimately, when you boil it all down, it comes to this. The long-term legitimacy of any system depends on its ability to solve the critical problems of society. The stability of any country, both politically and economically, rests on whether people believe in the system. And that belief, that legitimacy, is earned by proving to citizens that the system actually works, that it can solve the real problems that people face every single day. So by learning to look beyond the economic spreadsheets and read these hidden forces, we can get a much more accurate, much more realistic view of the world. We start to see it not just as some static model, but as the complex, dynamic, and deeply human system that it really is. And that leaves us with a final thought to take away. Now that you have this framework, I want you to look around. What are the unseen political and social risks that are shaping our world right now? The answers, I think, might just surprise you.